My father's a mountain climber, and he climbs really big mountains with names like Rainier and Denali and Aconcagua. One of the reasons to climb to the top of the mountain is because it allows you to see a very different perspective of the journey that got you there. You can see all the different contours, the valleys, and it really gives you a different sense of perspective. I'm going to tell you a story today of hope and exploration, but not to the top of the highest mountain, but rather to the depths of your biology. Now, to do so, I need to give you a little historical context. So one of the early biological explorers was Charles Darwin. And so when Charles Darwin looked at the world around him, what he concluded was that it wasn't the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but rather it was the one most responsive to change. Change is intimately connected to time. And so to look at biology and time, I think this organism paints a very, very interesting perspective, and that is the caterpillar and the butterfly. So this organism has the same genetic template, but it depends on when you look at it to specifically see what sort of its behavior is. Now, similar to a Rosetta Stone, what we do is we try to map all of the molecules that this organism expresses, and then map them onto some sort of map-like framework. Now, to do that, you might ask yourself, what would a map like this look like? So in the 1950s, shortly after the discovery of DNA, Waddington started devising ideas of specifically what would the contours of your life look like. Now, similar to this marble, it might roll down the various slopes that are there, but it was recognized early on that one could change the contours and the valleys and how that marble would roll through like the trajectory of life based on social traits, your environment, the drugs that you take, and so forth. Now, a map like I'm describing here also might be something like, say, the traffic patterns in a Google map. So you might be in a major metropolis such as Washington, D.C., and you want to get from point A to point B as quickly as you can. So what you would do is pull up the map and look at the traffic patterns that are going through the various arteries and throughways so that you can get there most efficiently. Now, when we measure all of the molecules, we can create a map as well, and I'm just sort of focusing on a small bit here, but you also see things like roundabouts, and what we want to do is measure the molecular flow through life. The hope is that in about 50 years from now, or sometime in the future, you'll be able to go to your physician and she'll run a systems-wide molecular test. She'll map this out for you personally, and she'll come back to you and say, you know, in approximately 2 to 3 years, your map indicates that you would have developed diabetes. But what we're going to do is change the contours of your life, and that disease won't present itself as it would have. Now, it wouldn't just be diabetes, but it would be a whole range of different disease states that you might encounter. Now, we have 3 major challenges that we have to address to make a map like what you're talking about. I'm showing here an iceberg, and the first challenge is how do we measure everything that we need? So we can see everything that's poking out of the water, right? And that's similar to being able to measure all of your genes. But then lurking under the waterline are many molecules, things like proteins and small molecules, but really daunting are all of the chemical exposures that you could encounter in your daily life. And so if I were to tell you what the number is, it's a 1 followed by 50 zeros. And it's difficult for me to conceptualize what such a number looks like, so let me try to put the numbers in perspective. So right now, there's approximately 8 billion people living on the planet Earth, representing a small fraction of the 150 billion that have ever walked the face of the planet in the past 50,000 years. That's a small number compared to the 30 trillion cells making up your body, or the close to 40 trillion bacteria that live on you and within you and call you home. That too is a small number compared to the 75 million trillion grains of sand covering the planet Earth across all the oceans and all of the deserts combined. Now, the number that we're talking about that we may need to be able to measure is this one shown here, right? This is a very large number. So what we need is we need to measure things fast. So what our group and a number of others have embarked upon is to develop technologies to allow you to measure things very quickly. So by today's standards, we have the capacity to measure close to 1 billion molecules per second, and we can generate approximately 1 terabyte of data every hour. Now, what do we do with all of this data? Because we have no hope in being able to look through this manually. So to do that, we take inspiration from those that have come before us. And so, for example, visionaries like Fritz Kahn, what he would do is he would take complex ideas of biology and simplify those to very simple pictures about what your body's functioning is doing. And on the right is a quote from Lewis Carroll. So Lewis Carroll, of course, was a famous mathematician, but probably more well known for writing Alice in Wonderland. And what Lewis Carroll said was, the Cartographers Guild struck a map of the empire which coincided point for point with it. Now what this is this is basically a map with a scale bar of 1 mile equals 1 mile, which is completely useless. So what we need to do is we need to be able to measure everything we possibly can and very quickly figure out what are the important parts. So what we do is we ask the data to organize itself and for the data to tell us what is important about it. And so what we do is we borrow tools from places like astronomy, cattle ranching, internet commerce, and that goes by names like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So to give you an example, when Amazon wants to give you, for example, a recommendation of what you might like to do, what they do is they create a picture of you. That picture represents your page views, your buying history, and other pieces of information. They create a tile. They then say we have 200 million customers, so we'll create a picture for each of those 200 million, and we'll start sliding them around, much like a sliding puzzle game. What they're looking for is they're looking for the picture which most closely resembles you. And they ask those 2 customers to do what the other one did last as a prediction of what you would like to do next. And that is precisely what we do with the biological data. Now, I'd like to give you an example of where we're moving with these strategies. And it's in building so-called humans on a chip. And so approximately 10 years ago, the Department of Defense and the Food and Drug Administration created a partnership to solve a very large problem. And that was the cost of drug development. What they recognized is that in the normal course of events, you do drug testing on cells, then animal testing in a mouse or a dog, for example, and then in humans. You lose approximately 40% of the drugs when you move from the animal to the human because you're not a mouse or a dog. You also lose about 40% of the drugs because you tested them in the animal first and they failed when they would have worked if they went directly to you. So right off the bat, we lose about 80% of the potential drugs that would have been helpful for you. So what they embarked on was to build human organs on functional chips, not unlike this. And that is to create things like livers and hearts and kidneys and brains, and then use those to monitor health status in response to drugs. And so, for example, you can start linking these things together. And what we do is we then take the drug that we want to test and we feed it to our human on a chip. And it's a little bit like hitting a bell, and we listen to how it rings molecularly. And so I'd like to just show you what this type of data looks like. And so this is a functioning human liver on chip. And this shows you what those self-organized maps of the data look like when we feed this liver acetaminophen or Tylenol. And so in approximately 24 hours, what we can do is we can reproduce decades and decades of research on what your body does in response to Tylenol. Now, moving out of the laboratory and back into the world, I'd like to leave you with a call to action. The United States has begun a program called All of Us. And All of Us is a program to enlist over 1 million Americans so that we can very accurately define your biology based on environment, geography, and the things to which you're exposed. And so the ultimate hope is that we could get to that place in 50 years from now where we can map your biology when you visit your physician. And so what I encourage you to do is to help us map your life and everything else. Thank you.